The day Maya Torres moved into apartment 4B, she believed she was escaping. At 24, she had spent her entire life running from her father's screaming matches with her mother, from the cramped studio in the Bronx where she could hear her neighbors arguing through paper-thin walls, from the endless parade of roommates who stole her food and her peace. She had saved for 3 years, working double shifts at the diner to afford a place of her own. Apartment 4B was a miracle. It was a small one-bedroom in a pre-war building on the edge of Crown Heights. The rent was suspiciously late $100 for a neighborhood that usually demanded twice that, but Maya convinced herself she had simply gotten lucky. The landlord, Mr. Harold Finch, was an elderly man with rheumy eyes and a slow, deliberate way of speaking. He had shown her the apartment himself, shuffling through the hallways with a cane. The previous tenant, he had said, his voice a dry rasp, was a quiet woman. Left in a hurry, no damage. You'll like it here. Very peaceful. Maya signed the lease without asking why the woman had left in a hurry. She was too tired to question her good fortune. The first week was perfect. She painted the living room a soft sage green. She hung string lights across the window. She bought a small fern from the bodega on the corner and placed it on her windowsill. For the first time in her life, she had a space that was entirely her own. She would come home from her shifts at the diner, kick off her shoes, and breathe. It was the quiet that she loved most. The building was old, with thick plaster walls that muffled the sounds of the city. She could hear the distant hum of traffic, the occasional siren, but nothing more. Nothing like the chaos she had grown up with, until the 3rd week. She first noticed them on a Tuesday night. She was in bed, scrolling through her phone, when she heard a sharp, muffled sound from the apartment next door. Apartment 4A. It wasn't loud enough to be a scream, but it was enough to make her pause. Maya turned up the volume on her phone, trying to ignore it. Then came the voice. A man's voice, low and guttural, speaking in rapid Spanish. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Anger, control, threat. A woman's voice responded, softer, pleading. Maya pressed her ear against the wall. She could hear fragments pour favor. No MS, lo siento, please. No more, I'm sorry. She pulled away, her heart racing. She knew that rhythm. She had grown up hearing it through the walls of her parents' apartment. The rise and fall of a man's rage, the quiet desperation of a woman trying to survive it. She had promised herself she would never live near it again. But this wasn't her business. She told herself that. The walls were thick, the voices were muffled. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe they were just arguing about money, about chores, about nothing important. She put her pillow over her head and tried to sleep. The next morning, she saw them in the hallway. The woman was small, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and shadows under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She was carrying a grocery bag, and her knuckles were white where she gripped the handles. She moved quickly, her eyes fixed on the floor. Behind her, a man emerged from the apartment. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and a gold chain around his neck. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way. He lit a cigarette in the hallway, despite the no-smoking sign on the wall. Maya smiled at the woman, a small, tentative smile. The woman looked up, her eyes wide and frightened. She didn't smile back. She hurried past Maya and disappeared down the stairs. The man watched Maya for a moment, his gaze cold and assessing. Then he followed the woman. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She told herself she would check on the woman. The next time she saw her alone, she would say something. Ask if she was okay. Offer help if she needed it. But she never got the chance. It happened on a Saturday. Maya had worked a double shift at the diner and was tired. She had eaten a bowl of instant ramen, taken a long shower, and climbed into bed at 11 o'clock. She was drifting off to sleep when she heard it. A scream, not the muffled, pleading voice she had heard before. This was a raw, primal sound that cut through the thick plaster walls like a knife. It was a woman's scream, and it was filled with terror. Maya shot up in bed, her heart pounding. She listened. The screaming stopped. Then came the banging, heavy, violent thuds, against a wall or against a body. She heard furniture being thrown, glass shattering, a man shouting words she couldn't understand, and then silence. Maya sat frozen in her bed, her hands trembling. She reached for her phone. Her thumb hovered over the emergency call button. Call the police. Call them now. But her thumb didn't move. She had grown up in a household where calling the police was the worst thing you could do. Her father had drilled it into her head. What happens in this house stays in this house. You call the cops and you'll destroy this family. Do you want to destroy our family, Maya? She had never called the police, not for her mother, not for herself. She put the phone down. She told herself the woman was fine, that it was just an argument, that the banging was just furniture, that people fought and screamed and it didn't always mean the worst. She lay back down, pulled the covers over her head, and tried to sleep, but she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling until dawn, waiting for another scream that never came. The next morning, she knocked on the door of apartment 4A. No answer. She knocked again, harder. She pressed her ear to the door and heard nothing. No sounds of movement, no breathing, no television. She called the woman's name. She still didn't know it, but there was no response. Maya went back to her apartment and tried to forget what she had heard. That evening, she saw the man from apartment 4A in the hallway. He was carrying a duffel bag and wearing the same gold chain. He smiled at her cold, knowing Smileland walked past her without a word. She noticed something in his hand. A ring, a plain gold band, a wedding ring. She didn't see the woman again. A week passed. Maya tried to convince herself that everything was normal. The woman had left. People left relationships all the time. Maybe she had finally gathered the courage to walk out. Maybe she was staying with her mother, with a friend, in a shelter somewhere safe. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The smell started on the third day. It was faint at first, a sour, sickly sweetness that lingered in the hallway. Maya thought it was the garbage, the old pipes, the damp plaster of the old building. But the smell grew stronger. On the fifth day, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She called the landlord, Mr. Finch, and told him about the smell. The tenant in 4A, she said, I think something's wrong. I haven't seen her in almost a week. Mr. Finch was silent for a moment. The woman in 4A, she moved out, left her apartment. I already cleaned it out. She moved out. I didn't see any moving trucks. She left quietly, Mr. Finch said. A lot of people leave quietly. Don't worry about it. I'll send someone to check the pipes. Goodbye. He hung up. Maya stood in her apartment, her phone pressed against her ear, her heart racing. Something wasn't right. She called the police that night. She told them everything, the screams, the banging, the silence, the smell, the landlord's dismissive response. A patrol car arrived an hour later. 2 officers knocked on the door of apartment 4A. No answer. They called for a locksmith. Maya watched from her doorway as they broke the lock and pushed open the door. The smell hit her like a physical blow. She gagged, covering her mouth with her hand. The officers went inside. She heard them talking in low, grim voices. Then one of them came out, his face pale. Ma'am, he said, please go back inside your apartment. What happened? Maya asked, her voice shaking. Is she in there? The officer didn't answer. He just guided her back to her apartment and closed the door. Maya spent the night shaking in her bed. The woman in apartment for Etha, woman with the dark hair and the frightened eyes, was dead. She had been dead for 6 days, and Maya had heard every moment of it. Harold Finch had been a landlord for 42 years. He had inherited the building from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him. The Finch family had owned real estate in Brooklyn since the 1920s, and they had built their fortune on one simple principle: Never spend $1 you don't have to. Mr. Finch was a practical man. He didn't believe in sentimentality, and he certainly didn't believe in charity. He rented to anyone who could pay, and he evicted anyone who couldn't. He didn't ask questions. He didn't get involved, and he definitely didn't report his tenants to the police. When he leased apartment for A to Roberto Vasquez, he didn't ask for a credit check. He didn't ask for references. He just took the cashed $1,200, 2 months' rent in advance, and handed over the keys. Roberto Vasquez had a history, a long one. Domestic violence charges in New Jersey, a restraining order filed by his first wife, an arrest for assault with a deadly weapon charges eventually dropped when the witness refused to testify. Mr. Finch knew none of this, or rather, he chose not to know. When the woman Delia moved in with Roberto, Mr. Finch didn't add her to the lease. He didn't want the paperwork. He just wanted the rent, and he didn't want any trouble. So when Maya called him about the smell, about the silence, about the woman who had vanished, he did what any practical landlord would do. He lied. She moved out. I cleaned the apartment. Nothing to worry about. He hoped the problem would go away, but it didn't. The police interrogated Roberto Vasquez for 12 hours. He didn't confess right away. He had been through this before. He knew the drill. Stay silent. Demand a lawyer. Wait it out. His first wife had tried to have him arrested 3 times, and each time he had walked free. But this time was different. The detective showed him the photographs. The crime scene photos from apartment 4A. Delia's body on the floor, her face frozen in a mask of terror. The bruises around her neck. The blood. Roberto looked at the photographs and said nothing. The detective told him about the fingerprint evidence, the broken glass with his prints, the neighbor's testimony, Maya's testimony about the screams, the banging, the night of terror. Roberto said nothing, and then the detective told him about the smell, about how Maya had called the police, about how she had reported every detail, every moment of that night. Roberto's face changed, his jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists. That girl, he said, his voice a low growl. The one next door? She was listening. She was, the detective said. She heard everything. Roberto was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that made the detective lean forward. She couldn't have heard everything, Roberto said, because she wasn't there when it happened. She wasn't there for any of it. What are you talking about? Roberto smiled a cold, cruel smile. I'll tell you what happened, he said, but you're not going to like it. Then he told them the truth. Delia was dead, but she hadn't died on Saturday night. Roberto had been drinking. He had a temper. Everyone knew that. Delia knew it better than most. She was always threatening to leave, always packing a bag, always crying. On Friday night, he came home to find her packing again. Where are you going? He asked. Anywhere, she said. Anywhere away from you. He laughed at first. She said that every week. But this time she had a bus ticket in her hand. She had cash. She had her identification. She was really leaving. He asked her to stay. He begged her. He told her he would change. He said all the things he always said, but she wouldn't listen. So he grabbed her by the throat. He didn't mean to kill her. That's what he told the detective. He just wanted to stop her from leaving. He squeezed too hard, held on too long, and then she wasn't moving anymore. He panicked. He hid her body in the bathtub and covered it with a tarp. He spent the next day trying to figure out what to do. He was still trying to figure it out when Maya knocked on his door the next morning. He didn't answer. He waited until dark. Then he carried Delia's body down the back stairwell and into his car. He drove to a construction site on the other side of Brooklyn and left her there. Then he cleaned the apartment half-heartedly because he couldn't bear to look at the blood and packed his things. On Tuesday, Mr. Finch came to collect the rent. Roberto opened the door, his eyes red and swollen, his voice steady. She moved out, he said. I'm leaving too. Keep the deposit. Mr. Finch looked past him at the empty apartment. The faint smell of bleach. the freshly painted walls. He didn't ask questions. He just handed Roberto the security deposit, $1,200 in cash, and let him go. Roberto Vasquez was arrested at his cousin's house in Queens 2 days after his confession. He was charged with second-degree murder. The district attorney's office wanted first degree, but they couldn't prove premeditation. The fight had been sudden. The choking had been impulsive. It was a crime of passion, not a calculated killing. But Maya's testimony was the key. She was the only one who had heard the struggle, the only one who could place Roberto in the apartment at the time of Delia's disappearance, the only one who had called the police when no one else cared. Roberto's defense attorney argued that Maya's testimony was unreliable. She was a young woman, living alone, easily frightened. She had admitted she didn't call the police immediately. She had admitted she had doubted herself. She had admitted she had grown up in a violent household and was projecting her own fears onto the couple next door. The attorney painted Maya as a hysterical, unreliable witness. He argued that she had invented the screams in her mind because of her own trauma. Maya sat in the courtroom and listened to him destroy her character. She felt sick. She had heard those screams. She had heard the banging. She had heard the silence that followed. She had lived with the guilt of not calling the police, of not pounding on the door, of not saving Delia's life. And now she was being accused of lying. Maya's testimony lasted 2 hours. She didn't cry. She didn't lose her temper. She spoke in a calm, steady voice, describing every detail of that night. The scream, the banging, the glass shattering, the silence. When the prosecutor asked her why she had waited to call the police, she told the truth. "Because I was afraid," she said. "Because I was taught that you don't call the police. Because I thought it would make things worse." She paused. "And because I thought she had left, I wanted to believe she had left. I wanted to believe that she had escaped." The defense attorney cross-examined her for an hour. He tried to rattle her, to make her doubt herself. He brought up her father's arrest record, her mother's restraining order, her own history of depression. Maya answered every question. When she left the stand, she met Roberto's eyes. He didn't look angry. He didn't look guilty. He looked confused, as if he couldn't understand why she was there, why she was testifying, why she cared about Delia. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Roberto Vasquez guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in state prison. Maya thought the trial would bring her closure. It didn't. She was haunted by the screams, the silence, the smell, the image of Delia's body in the tub, hidden beneath a tarp, while Maya slept 6 feet away. She couldn't stay in apartment for B. She moved out 3 weeks after the trial ended. She found a smaller apartment in a different neighborhood, a place with soundproofed walls and neighbors she never saw. She changed her phone number. She stopped working at the diner and found a job at a bookstore, where the quiet was soothing instead of terrifying. But she couldn't escape the memory of Mr. Finch, the landlord who had lied to her, the landlord who had cleaned the blood from apartment 4A and re-rented it to a new tenant within 2 weeks, the landlord who had paid Roberto's security deposit and let him walk away, the landlord who had done nothing. Maya's therapist told her that healing required action, that she needed to reclaim her agency, that she needed to hold someone accountable. So she sued Harold Finch. The lawsuit was for $80,000. Maya's lawyer argued that Mr. Finch was negligent. He had known about Roberto's history of violence, or he should have known. He had lied about Delia's disappearance. He had covered up the crime scene. He had allowed a murderer to escape. Mr. Finch's lawyer argued that Maya was a gold digger. She was exploiting a tragedy for financial gain. She had no evidence that Mr. Finch had known about Roberto's past. She couldn't prove that his actions had caused her any direct harm. Maya Torres is not a victim, the defense attorney said. She is a witness who did nothing to help Delia, and now wants to profit from her death. Maya felt those words like a slap. The case went to arbitration. In the courtroom of Judge Judith Scheindlina, legendary judge known for her no-nonsense style, her sharp wit, and her uncanny ability to see through lies. Judge Judy. Maya was terrified. She had watched Judge Judy on television, but being in her courtroom was something else entirely. The judge was small, but her presence filled the room. Her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Her voice was steady and commanding. Mr. Finch sat at the defendant's table, his face pale, his hands trembling. He was older now, his health failing, but his eyes still held that shrewd, calculating gleam. Judge Judy read the case file in silence. Then she looked at Maya. "Miss Torres," she said, "you're suing your landlord for $80,000. Why?" Maya took a deep breath. "Because he knew," she said. "He knew Roberto was a violent man. He knew Delia was in danger. He knew something was wrong. And he did nothing." "He did nothing," Judge Judy repeated. "What did you do?" Maya flinched. "I didn't call the police," she admitted. "Not right away. I was scared. I didn't want to get involved." Judge Judy leaned forward. "But you eventually called. You called the police. You testified. You sent a murderer to prison. That took courage." Maya blinked. She hadn't expected that. Mr. Finch's lawyer spoke up. "Your Honor, my client is an elderly man who made a simple mistake. He believed the tenant had moved out. He didn't know about the violence. He cannot be held responsible for this tragedy." Judge Judy turned to Mr. Finch. "Is that true?" she asked. "Did you believe Delia had moved out?" Mr. Finch coughed nervously. "Yes, Your Honor. Roberto told me she had left. I had no reason to doubt him." Judge Judy stared at him. "You had a tenant in your building," she said slowly, "who didn't answer her door. You had a foul smell in the hallway. You had a young woman calling you, begging you to investigate. And you did nothing, because you were afraid of losing your rent." Mr. Finch opened his mouth to protest, but Judge Judy held up her hand. "I've been a judge for decades," she said. "I've heard every excuse imaginable. And I can tell you, Mr. Finch, that the worst criminals aren't always the ones who commit the crimes. They're the ones who look the other way." She turned to Maya. "Ms. Torres," she said, "you're not a perfect victim. You made a mistake. You didn't call the police right away. But you did the right thing in the end. You called, you testified. You made sure Delia's killer faced justice." She paused. Mr. Finch did none of those things. He protected a murderer. He cleaned a crime scene. He let a killer walk free. And then he told you to mind your own business. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair. "I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Maya Torres, you are awarded $80,000. That is the maximum amount allowed in this courtroom. And Mr. Finch, I hope you remember this case for the rest of your life." Mr. Finch's face went pale. Maya wept. Maya used the money to pay off her student loans. She used the rest to start a nonprofit. She called it Delia's Voice, a charity that helped domestic violence victims find safe housing and legal representation. She worked with shelters, with lawyers, with social workers. She traveled to schools, to community centers, to churches, and told her story. She told them about the screams, about the silence, about the guilt that still haunted her. And she told them that no one should ever look the other way. Delia's voice grew. Within 2 years, it had helped over 500 women escape abusive relationships. Maya became a public figure, a champion for victims, a voice for the voiceless. But she never forgot Delia. She visited Delia's grave on the anniversary of her death. She laid flowers on the headstone, white roses, the same color as the ones Delia had been carrying the first time Maya saw her. She said a prayer, and then she went back to work. There were still women to save. This chapter takes us back to the police interrogation room, where the detective, a grizzled veteran named O'Malley, sits across from Roberto Vasquez. Roberto is calm to calm. He's been through this before. O'Malley pushes the crime scene photos across the table. "Look at her, Roberto. Look at what you did." Roberto glances at the photos and looks away. "I didn't do anything. She was dead when I found her." "Bull," O'Malley says. "We have a witness." The girl next door, she heard you. The screams, the banging, the glass breaking. Roberto's jaw tightens. She didn't hear anything. She was asleep. She wasn't asleep, O'Malley says. She was terrified. She heard Delia's screams. She heard her beg you to stop. And then she heard the silence. Roberto is quiet for a long moment. Then he says, she heard the silence. That's interesting, because I didn't hear anything. I was in the other room. I was watching TV. The volume was loud. O'Malley leans forward. Then who killed her? Roberto. Who did it? Roberto smiles. She jumped out the window. The windows were locked from the inside, O'Malley says. Roberto shrugs. Then she flew. O'Malley stares at him. He's seen a lot of monsters in his career, but Roberto Vasquez is something else. He's not just a killer. He's a liar, a manipulator, a man who will never admit what he's done. But O'Malley has one more card to play. Roberto, he says, I'm going to tell you a secret. The girl next door. Maya, she called us. That's right. She didn't ignore the screams. She didn't mind her own business. She called the police and she told us everything. Roberto's face changes. His arrogance flickers. His eyes narrow. She's going to testify, O'Malley says. She's going to tell the jury exactly what she heard, and they're going to believe her. Roberto slams his fists on the table. She's a liar, he shouts. She doesn't know anything. She wasn't there. She was there, O'Malley says. She was right next door, and she heard every single second of it. Roberto's composure shatters. He screams, he thrashes, he threatens Maya and O'Malley and anyone else he can think of. The guards pull him out of the room. O'Malley sits back and exhales. It's over. This chapter is Maya's full testimony in the murder trial. She's on the stand. The courtroom is packed. Roberto's family is in the back row, glaring at her. The prosecution and defense teams are watching her every move. The prosecutor, a young woman named Sarah Kim, asks her to describe the night of the murder. Maya takes a deep breath and begins. I was in bed, she says. I had just fallen asleep. And then I heard a scream. She describes everything. The fear, the hesitation, the guilt that followed. The defense attorney cross-examines her. He tries to break her. Miss Torres, he says, you admit that you didn't call the police immediately. You admit that you went back to sleep. You admit that you didn't bang on the door or try to intervene. Is it possible that you simply imagined the screams? No, Maya says. Is it possible that you misheard? That the noises were something else? A movie? A dream? No, Maya says. I heard what I heard. The defense attorney scowls. Ms. Torres, are you aware that you have a history of mental health issues? Depression, anxiety, PTSD from childhood trauma? Isn't it possible that your perception of events is distorted? Maya feels tears prick at her eyes, but she doesn't waver. It's possible, she says, that I have mental health issues. It's possible that I misheard things sometimes. But I didn't mishear that night. I heard Delia's screams. I heard Roberto's voice. And I heard Delia die. The courtroom is silent. The defense attorney backs off. The jury looks at Maya with something like respect. She has told the truth, and the truth is on her side. A year after the trial, Maya receives a letter. It's from Delia's mother, a woman named Rosa, who lives in the Dominican Republic. Rosa had been estranged from Delia for years. She had never approved of her relationship with Roberto, but she had been heartbroken by her daughter's death. The letter is simple and heartfelt. Dear Maya, it reads, I don't know you. I don't know why you helped my daughter, but I want to thank you. You did what I should have done. You stayed. You listened. You made sure my Delia's voice was heard. I will never forget what you did. I pray for you every night. May God bless you and keep you always. Maya reads the letter 3 times. Then she frames it and hangs it in her office at Delia's voice. It reminds her why she fights. Maya receives another letter. This one is from a woman named Isabella, a survivor of domestic violence who had been helped by Delia's voice. Isabella writes about her escape, how she had fled her husband in the middle of the night, how she had found a shelter, how she had received legal help to file a restraining order and get custody of her children. I'm alive. My children are safe. And it's all because people like you care enough to help. Thank you. You gave me my life back. Maya cries when she reads the letter. She thinks about Delia, the woman she never got to know, the woman whose death she had witnessed, the woman whose life had been taken too soon. And she thinks about all the women like Delia who are still trapped, still scared, still waiting for someone to listen. She can't save all of them, but she can save some, and that's enough. The story ends with Maya visiting Delia's grave. It's the 5th anniversary of Delia's death. Maya is older now, wiser, her hair streaked with gray. She lays a bouquet of white roses on the headstone. She speaks to Delia. I'm sorry I didn't save you, she says. I'm sorry I waited so long, but I hope you can forgive me. And I hope you know that I carry you with me every day, in everything I do. She stands up and looks at the sky. You're still here, Delia. You're still alive in the women we save. You're still alive in the stories we tell. And you're still alive in the justice we fight for. She wipes away a tear. I promise you, she says, I won't stop fighting until every woman is safe, until every voice is heard. She walks away from the grave. The sun is setting over the cemetery, casting long shadows across the grass. Maya gets into her car and drives away. She has a meeting in an hour with a new client, a young woman who is escaping her abuser. She has work to do, and she will never look the other way again.